Hi, I'm Harrison Williams and this is CHC Talks. And this week we're talking about risk. Now the sun doesn't always shine on websites and things do go wrong. And there are more and more legislations coming into play to protect people who use your website and of course any website that you may be using. Now one of those that's come out most recently is GDPR. Now GDPR does have quite a big effect on businesses going forward. In the future they're going to fine people for any breach of the legislation either 4% of their global turnover or £20 million, whichever is greater. Now that is an astonishing risk for any business. Now we haven't seen too many of these come into force yet, but there have been a couple, and they are giving some leniency, a bit of grace time for everybody to kind of catch up with the legislation itself. But it is something that we really do need to be wary of. So there's a few things that kind of outline the basics of what GDPR is. And the first is you have to tell people what data you're storing on your website about them. And then the second is you have to ask permission to be able to use that data in some way. So you have to tell them what data you're using and you have to ask permission for being able to do that. The third, of course, is that you're not allowed to do anything naughty with this data. So if you choose to do something that's a little bit malicious, then you will be in breach of GDPR. And the last one is you have to keep it secure. So those are the kind of big 4 points, but essentially the secure one is the more wide-reaching. That comes into the internals of your business operation as well, not just your website. But from a website perspective, it's becoming more and more important to do things like encrypt files, set up firewalls to make sure you're protecting user data as best you can. Checkboxes are also becoming really important on websites. You need to store the moment that somebody gave you the permission to use their data and even the moment that they decided that they didn't want you to have any more. So there's a couple of things around freedom of information and the data that you're storing with GDPR. And one is if anybody comes to your website and you're capturing data and they want to see what data you've captured about them, you have the right or the visitor has a right to ask you for the data that you have on them. So by law, you have to hand over that data in some way that is meaningful and easy to interpret from their perspective. So that's quite a big problem for most businesses online. The second, of course, is to follow up from that, and if somebody is unhappy with the data that you have about them, you have to delete it if they ask it. So if they say, I no longer want to be captured by your website, I don't want any of the information that you have on me to be stored anymore, you have to be able to go and delete everything that you have about this person. So it could be their email address, how many times they've called, how many times they've visited the website, if they visited the website on their mobile phone or on the desktop. It's a really complex problem very quickly. Now, a nice little solution for cookies and general tracking around the different types of data that you have is a third-party solution called CookieBot. Now CookieBot is a little plugin, it's free for most people, it goes up to about £12 a month I think for more busy websites, and essentially what it does is it pieces all of the bits of information that you've got and the cookies that you're capturing and highlights them in an easy to understand way for users that come to your website, and then it also captures the moment that they accept the usage of those cookies. So another thing that puts all of this at risk is people hacking your website. Now we've seen hacks on websites increase massively over the last couple of years. In 2017 Google reported that there was a 32% increase in hacks, and we're expecting a much bigger number this year in itself. This has led to 18.5 million websites at any given time being hacked online. So there's lots of mischievous events happening. So how does this work? What does this actually look like in practice? Well, in practice there's three different types of hacking events really that make up the majority of problems when it comes to data. The first is a phishing scam, and essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to capture a payment through a gateway that is not yours. It's not a part of your website, but they are replacing the final pages on checkout. It could also direct people through to a website that's selling something that isn't yours, and they're capturing people's details and then basically taking payments that are not legitimate from your website. The second is probably the most obvious. It's where people will either insert a virus or some malicious code into your site. These can be automated or done by a person, where it removes all of the website that you have, all the code that is there, all the files. It will delete it automatically and then replace it with its own. And these can be really silly little things, saying, you've been hacked by Dave, thanks Dave. And some are a little bit more serious, where they're hacking things and replacing it with things that may seem legitimate, and using your brand credibility to sell something again or push people around. We've seen this most at risk, where people are closed out from their own server and then basically held to ransom unless they pay the hackers some money. They can't release their website, and therefore they're in jeopardy for the future. Another big part of this type of hack is that people can capture the data that's on your site. So once they've got into your server, they can root around for different files and databases to see what information you have, and therefore steal it. We've seen that with Equifax and Sony in the past. Big companies suffer from this just as badly as small companies do. And essentially, if somebody really wants to hack your website, they probably will, but you can put some measures in place. The last really common type of hacking is something called a UI redress. And essentially what they're doing is they're doing some really sneaky little things, where they keep most of your website the same as it always has been. But what they change is where your links go. So instead of clicking on About and reading about your business, you click on About and it will go through again to a malicious type of site, where either they're ripping data, infecting people's websites or computers, or trying to take payments that they shouldn't be taking. So what can we do about this? There's plenty of layers of protection that we can put in place at the moment, and they all come readily available through most providers of any type of hosting. The first thing that you can do is purchase and install an SSL certificate. This is really important if you're passing any data back and forth that's sensitive about a visitor to your server from their website. So if somebody comes to your website and enters a form or tries to buy something, enters their card details, an SSL basically encrypts it at both ends to make sure that the data is passed from your website's front end to the back end safely. There's no chance of a third party sneaking in between and stealing that data. The second is around firewalls and CDNs. Essentially what these do is they put up a blockade to stop people who are naughty coming to your site in the first place. So it's hard to hack a website if you can't actually see it in the first place. So firewalls obviously block known IP addresses that have done something bad. They're also aware and self-learning, so if an IP address consistently does something that it shouldn't be doing, trying to insert some JavaScript into the site, pushing data around in a way that it shouldn't be, or generally just doing something, repeatedly hitting the site so it crashes, those types of events, it's smart learning, so it will shut those people down and deny them access. The other side of that is a CDN. It's a content delivery network, and essentially what this does, it's more about speed and making a more efficient website, but essentially what it does is it copies your site and places it locally to any visitor across the world. So if you're based in London and you have somebody visiting your website in LA, historically what would happen is that the data would have to pass from London to LA, and you have to wait for that to happen. So that makes your website a bit slower. A content delivery network essentially has a copy of your site in LA, so when somebody visits it, it will be loading very quickly like it would locally. The advantage to this is that if you're a amateur hacker, if you like, it's very difficult to find what the original source of the website is, because the content delivery network has a copy of the site everywhere, which is handy. Another thing that's very, very easy to do, and pretty much any website, any business, whatever the size, should have in place is backups. Now, backups can be done monthly, yearly, daily if you like. There's lots of services available. There's one that we use that restores the site within about 5 or 6 minutes. It's very handy, so if somebody does corrupt all your data and does something really bad, you can just fix it within a couple of seconds. And the last is probably more development heavy. It is a serious investment to kind of go down this route, but essentially you can secure the code that runs your site. You can build in little tricks and firewalls on the back end of the site that restricts the ability for anybody to edit the site in any way. There are consequences to this in that it limits how many people you have in your business that may be able to edit the website. So the more and more exposure you give and permission you have, the less secure your website is. So it's worth considering whether or not you want something like that in place. It's generally, we see it most commonly put into practice when somebody is being directly and maliciously attacked by somebody for some reason. Most hacking events generally happen not because it's a personal attack on you. They generally don't care. They just want your traffic or your server space. That is it. So that's how you can put some protection into your website. We really highly advise that everybody kind of looks at the firewall CDN approach and the backups as a kind of bare minimum nowadays. So I hope you found this video interesting and helpful, and thank you very much for watching.